Today on the Relationship Revival Show, I'm joined by Melissa Fulgieri. Melissa is a therapist, professor, author, and entrepreneur providing individual, couples, and family therapy to millennials working to overcome depression, anxiety, and trauma. She also helps people return to themselves in order to live and love more authentically. You're listening to the Relationship Revival Podcast with John DeBach, also known as Mr. Spirituality. That's me. I'm your host, giving you insights and guidance from over 10 years in the field of this amazing journey we call romance. On this show, I go over everything you need to know about how to get into a relationship, how to get the most out of a relationship, and sometimes even how to gracefully end a relationship without pulling your hair out and going crazy. And occasionally, I'm even joined by new and old friends who are also relationship experts to bring you guidance and wisdom with new perspectives. Thanks for stopping by. I'm talking today with Melissa. Hey, how you doing, Melissa?
I'm great. How are you? I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you. Melissa, why don't you take us through your past as a practitioner, as a professor? I know you're an entrepreneur. Kind of give some background to everybody so we can understand where you're coming at in the world of couples counseling.
Yeah, sure. So I was one of those lucky few who really knew from an early age what I wanted to do, meaning that
How early?
high school.
No kidding. In high school, you knew what you wanted to do.
So let me amend that statement. I guess in high school, I knew that I was most interested in psychology. As soon as I sort of took Psych 101, I was like, yep, this is pretty much it. Like, this is the thing that I'm passionate about. And I didn't exactly know what I would do with it. But I knew that that's where I wanted to live professionally for sure. So then I started sort of researching a little bit about like, well, what can you do with this type of degree? And so I learned about social work. I had been studying abroad overseas, and I ended up doing some work in Ghana in West Africa, and I ended up getting this social justice award. And this is embarrassing to admit, but I didn't even know what the term social justice meant. I was like, oh, that's nice that I got this award. And then when I started learning about what social justice meant, I thought, oh, this is a perfect goal, a perfect sort of purpose for me, because I'm already very socially justice minded. So to be able to put language to what I was already really driven by was really nice. And so that's what led me to social work. It's what led me to get a master's in social work. And
well, let's back up for a sec. What kind of work did you do in Ghana? That sounds really interesting.
I was really interested. I was doing a lot of work as a research assistant with HIV/AIDS, and a lot of work in New York with the men who have sex with men population, and researching how their sexual activity either led to or put them more at risk at HIV transmission. And then that work took me to Ghana, where I created a documentary with a couple girlfriends around the stigmatization of HIV transmission. And that ultimately led me to really think about, these big worldly concepts, and understand or learn a little bit more about the nuance of it, and see how you could really just speak to a very complex issue in a way that resonated with people.
That's great. And that kind of led you to more micro work, working with people one-on-one.
Exactly.
So what was the jump there?
The jump there was really around the craft of therapy. Like, one of the things that I like the most about being a therapist is it's never like a checkbox. You can never just get really good at it and then you're done. Just because of the way like the field works, you have to keep learning, you have to keep training, you have to keep humbling yourself, because humans change and the research changes. And so we also have to change with it. And so I just really loved that I could get as good as possible at something and still have so much further to go. And I just, I was one of those
people. You liked that. So a lot of people wouldn't like that. A lot of people would say, I want to be the best at something. Did you have a perfectionist mindset growing up, or was that always something you were like, I don't think that's possible?
I'm pretty growth oriented. It's
So that makes sense.
yeah, I'm extremely competitive, but I'm competitive with myself the most, I would say.
Hmm.
Like when I'm gunning for a promotion, obviously my competitiveness does come out for sure, but I don't know, I've always been sort of like the my own harshest critic, and so
Yeah.
I find that there's enough competition to go around just in my own psyche. So it's
Like
yeah,
most people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah, the growth oriented mindset. Yeah, so it's exciting because it's like you'll never reach that, you
no.
know, climax. There's just a constant lifelong trajectory there for you.
Yeah, for sure. I was the type of friend who was like the advice giver. And so I always found it really natural to connect with people on a really deep level. And really, I just really enjoyed conversation. I was a theater kid. And so I really enjoyed sort of like empathy and connection and, connecting to an audience is not totally dissimilar than connecting with a client, right? You're connecting on a very emotional, visceral level. And so it was just a really perfect fit for me very early on. And then I'm someone who likes to wear a lot of different hats. And so, my career has really allowed me to do that in a lot of, different ways.
That's great. So what are you doing these days? What's your practice actually look like?
Yeah, so it's so funny because I was trained, the first sort of theory I learned about was feminist theory and how women have a tendency to self-silence. And so I had, worked with these really badass women that I really looked up to. And so I started going on this trajectory of, women's empowerment. And then I started learning more about relationships, and I wrote a book for couples in the last year. That was a really wonderful experience for me. But today, what I would say, which is most interesting, is that my practice is about 70% individual men these days. And I still see a lot of couples, but I'm noticing that there is sort of this interesting groundswell of more men prioritizing their mental health in this really incredible way. And so that's currently what I'm focused on.
And how are the clients coming to you? Because that's interesting with your feminist background that you're attracting 70% of your caseload as these men. What do you think the magnet is there that's pulling them into you?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but I think it's perhaps, I have a real compassion for all humans, and I think that in the past few years, there's been a real reckoning with men around how they behave, how they show up in the world, how they show up in their homes. And I've had so many men come through my door and basically say to me like, I not only want to learn how to treat the people in my life better, but I also think I need to learn how to treat myself better. And,
Hmm.
I think that that's a really powerful thing that for whatever reason I'm well placed to support with. Maybe because I work from a very humanist approach. I work from a very client centered and self compassionate approach. So the way that I work is to really have compassion for yourself at the same time as holding accountability. I don't think our culture really likes to do both. I think we like to say, like, this person's a horrible person and this person is a good person. And that's just not humans. Humans are very imperfect and we're multifaceted. And so I think social workers, therapists really understand that. And so many of us are well suited to help sit in that nuance of human behavior.
I think that's a good point, that there's these kind of these shades of gray we always talk about that people exist in. One issue I found with the men who are coming to me, and I'd love to hear your take about it, is this finding that happy medium. So most of the men I see aren't, I wouldn't say most, but I'd say it's not like an overwhelming majority where people have that toxic masculinity. It's more, I find like people have this tendency of not understanding how to lead as a man in their relationship. I'm talking about cisgender heteronormative relationships right now exclusively, because that's most of the clients I see just happen to fit in that bucket. And so it's interesting to see how, like, oftentimes I'll hear their wives or their girlfriends talk about how they they want a stronger masculine presence in the relationship, and yet the man doesn't know what that means without crossing some kind of an aggressive line, because they've been told their whole, the whole last 20 years to break down their walls, to be more vulnerable, to be more empathetic. And so it's confusing. What's your kind of take on how you would approach something like that?
So I talk a lot about the patriarchy and how women are some of the best foot soldiers of the patriarchy, meaning that women also have this idea of what a man is supposed to be, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not been created in our own minds. It gets created by society that says men should provide, they should pay on the first date, and if they don't, they're a deadbeat, and they should have a certain job, right? When women are dating, the thing that a woman asks, maybe it's the first question, maybe it's the third question, but it's certainly top five, is what does the man do for work, right? And
Yep.
that's based on a societal premise that the man is the provider, which we're obviously shifting now, but we have a long way to go. And so men are taught from day one that they should be the provider, and the provider is also strong, but the provider is also stoic. The provider shouldn't cry. The provider shouldn't be vulnerable. And yet we're giving men these mixed messages around, well, be this, but also be that. In the same way we're giving women mixed messages around, be this, but also be that. It's very difficult to do both. And we often shame women when they step outside their gender role, in the same way we shame men when they step outside their gender roles. And so it's not surprising to me that all the genders are really confused, because we're given all of these different requirements on who and how we should be, when in reality we're all very different people. And so you can find a man out there who loves to cry, and that was really beaten out of them, whereas you can find a woman out there who doesn't have most emotionality as other women, and that she was shamed for. And so I think really no one wins under this, under the patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult. Sometimes when I see that face of just exhaustion on a male client, I'll kind of reassure them and say it's never been more difficult to understand what it means to be a man in modern history. And they kind of go, yeah, and it's like that. That's the relief. Like someone gets it. But
Totally.
now the process of building it back up and defining it and understanding it's different in every relationship too
Right.
is kind of that tiptoe, process of discovery that we all go through.
Right, right.
Um,
And holding both of that, right? Because yes, I can both say it is quite difficult to be a man, but I'm also a woman who has been harmed by men in big and
Absolutely.
small ways throughout my entire
Sure.
life, right? And so both of those things have to coexist. And we
Yes.
can't, like, I think social media loves to paint with a broad brush and pretends like those two things can't coexist, but you can both be struggling and also have been, you know, um, part of, you can both be the oppressor and the oppressed. That's what
Hmm.
intersectionality is, right? And our society doesn't feel super comfortable with those concepts yet.
Yeah. How, when you're dealing with these male clients on an individual level, is their frustration more externally outside of the relationship, like the societal pressures they're feeling, or is it within their own marriage or relationship from the women in their lives?
I think it's the same thing, right? So I think, part of my work is I believe the personal is political. I believe macro is the micro, and it's really not that different. It's just trickling down. And so, to use your example around, there's a huge conversation around consent, right? And there are so many women out there who are like, I just want a man to throw me against the wall and like not,
Sure.
ask, basically is what they're saying. I want them to take charge, right? But
Sure.
then there's this other concurrent argument, very important argument around consent. That's like, maybe you shouldn't just throw people against the wall. Maybe you should just, maybe you should ask about that. And, I hear from men a lot around like, well, which is it? Which is it? And my answer to them is always, it's both. And you're never going to be able to guess. You always want to have a conversation, but that conversation requires vulnerability. And we shame vulnerability out of each other, doesn't matter what gender you are, all the time, right? And so if a man says, hey, do you want me to throw you against the wall? Oftentimes a woman will say something like, you should know, right? Or, oh, you ruined it, right? And so it is a lose-lose
Yeah.
a lot of the time. And this is
And
not,
that's when they come to you and go, what am I supposed to do?
and I say to them, you're supposed to ask. And if a woman shames you for it, that's about her. That's
Uh-huh.
not about you, right? Because you have evolved past this place of like, well, then you as the woman need to be skilled up around what consent looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, if you can see that as sort of, not your fault and not her fault, but the patriarchy's fault, no
Mm-hmm.
one's to blame necessarily. It's about how we're both oppressed under this system.
Now, you're saying when you're talking about consent, honestly, it's not something that comes up as often for me because in a marriage, they don't really talk about it as much.
As well
Are
they
you seeing a
should.
lot of what?
They absolutely should, though.
It just doesn't come up so much in my practice. My
No.
question was, for you, are you seeing a lot of individuals who are not in a couple? Are you seeing individuals who are dating, or is this a conversation that comes up in marriages quite often?
Yeah, it comes up. I see folks who are dating. I see folks who are married. I see folks who are non-monogamous and married. I see
Mm-hmm.
folks who are in multiple relationship configurations. And so, yeah, it's really, what's so funny about your question is like, I think a lot of people have this view that like once you get married, you're supposed to know your spouse. I've been with my spouse for 11 years. We're still having conversations where I'm like, holy shit, what? I didn't know that about you. That's what you think about that thing? Like, where
Mm-hmm.
have I been? So I do still think that, yeah, marriage requires us to recontract constantly. And part of that
Yeah.
is about consent, but it's also about like, hey, I know I used to be the one who cooks and you used to be the one who loads the dishwasher, but I got to tell you, I can't do that anymore. Let's figure it out differently. And a lot of people don't initially see the benefit of a conversation like that for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, people get used to staying in their lane, and it's uncomfortable to change. But the other person, I always, if the other person is saying something and they're actually being brave enough to request change, because that takes some
Right.
courage.
Right.
There's room there to have a conversation. And we're not I mean, I make the mistake all the time where I shut things down or I'll be
Me too.
overwhelmed and blurt things out. Yeah, it happens. But then, how's the recovery process? Like
Right,
when do you
right,
go back and say, "Hey, so I kind of overreacted. Let's
right.
let's take that conversation back again." Which actually
Totally.
leads to, what your book is about, which is really about communication, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So your book is called the Couples Therapy Activity Book. Who is this for, first of all?
So it is for a couple that has been on a few dates, and it's a couple that has been on 5,000 dates. So it doesn't matter if you're married, if you're not, if you're in a domestic partnership, if you're it also honestly, because I for many years worked as a family therapist, for
Mm-hmm.
me a relationship is a relationship is a relationship. And so much of the book can also be extrapolated to any relationship. So this is primarily a book for couples to build intimacy, and it can also be used with other relationships in your life, both personal and professional.
And I have to say, I got a sneak peek of the book. I love the layout. It's super easy to read. It almost looks like, and I'm sure this is intentional, it looks like a recipe book in
Totally.
some instances
Yeah.
where it's like, what's needed? A couple pieces of
Yeah.
paper.
A
Here's a little
dash of
diagram. Yeah, yeah.
vulnerability.
So it's super digestible, and I love that because there's so many people who are readers and like
Hmm.
to just digest conversation. I mean, similar people who listen to podcasts where they just want to hear the stream of consciousness and kind of absorb it. But then there are people where it's like, I need a note card worth of practical, actionable advice so that I can know what I'm doing for the next 20 minutes or 25 minutes and actually accomplish a goal. And I think your book speaks to that type of mindset where it's like, I want something to do where I'll feel, not just learn in my mind, but actually feel like something is happening. And I talk to my clients all the time that the journey from the head to the heart is the longest and toughest road we go through.
Totally.
And having these experiential exercises seems super helpful. I think therapists, I mean, we all have our bag of tricks, when we're dealing with clients, but I think therapists would kind of also have benefit from this because they can assign these types of activities to their clients, whether they're in a session or as a homework assignment to take
For
home.
sure. For sure. Yeah. And there's a lot in there. I pulled from Gottman method, which is very, like one of the gold standards of couples work. I pulled from
Yep.
emotionally focused therapy. So, it's certainly, thank you for making that point. It can certainly be utilized by practitioners for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you using it with your own clients as like a little, way for them to kind of have a roadmap of what to do sometimes?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the stuff, as I noted, is cited from, other. It's evidence based, right? So it's therapeutic modalities that are already in existence. So much of the book, if not all of the book, is stuff that I've used in my practice, and used with other social workers. Because as I said, I also teach, so it's all been utilized in the real world for sure.
Is there a favorite exercise you could share that you kind of go to time and time again with your clients where you're like, this is the place I would start, or this is like,
Yeah.
maybe there's, something you would do in a specific situation, whether it's recovering from a loss of trust or something. I'd love people who are listening to this who don't have the benefit of seeing this like right in front of them like I do, what one of these exercises sounds like so they can get
Yeah.
excited about it.
Well, I really like this. It's like on page 2 and 3, what love is and what love isn't, and it's basically asking you yourself, not with your partner, to reflect on all of the ways that you feel love and the ways that you in the past haven't felt love. And the reason why I started with those two exercises is because I think people, it seems like such a dumb sort of concept, but most people when they're dating or when they're looking for love, they're really looking for someone to slot into their lifestyle, or they're looking for like, okay, I really want to get married, so let me find a husband, or I really want to get married, so let me find a partner. And when in reality, a lot of times people will find themselves in a relationship that actually didn't fit for them because they were looking for the thing as opposed to thinking about the experience of what they wanted the relationship to feel like. And so those first two exercises are really asking you to think about, what do you value? How do you feel love? Because it's quite specific, right? Some people really value really consistency, and they want to, have these long, intimate conversations with their partner. Some people don't value that. They value a partner to, really prioritize exercise or certain activities with. And so for me,
Hmm.
it's less about judging what you want and need and more about just really thinking about, what do I value? And then how do I use that knowledge to build the relationship that really feeds me?
Yeah, it's just as important to do this exercise for your partner as it is for yourself, because sometimes I don't think anybody is ever in their childhood as a teenager were never told to sit down and think, what does the perfect relationship look like for you?
Right.
And without actually having that concrete in your mind, I always tell my couples the goalpost just keeps moving. Because it's like, okay, well, I got that, but that's not what I wanted. So sit
Right.
down that so that if it actually happens, you can recognize that you have what you want. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it just happens and you're like, I feel happy and I don't know why. And then there's one fight and you're like, oh, wait, what happened?
Right.
So
Totally.
it's just
Totally.
solidifying there for sure.
And by the way, like many of us didn't have great models, so we're sort of
Yeah,
having to build what we want out of thin air. And that's extremely scary because we know what we don't want,
sure.
but maybe we don't know what we do, or we know what we do, but we don't know what we don't want. So it really depends
Right.
on each person what baggage they're bringing to the relationship.
Hmm. Based on their own history. Why do
Hmm.
you think this is so difficult? Why do you think people look at relationships and feel they're difficult or they're hard to kind of navigate?
I think because people are really only willing to meet themselves as deeply or meet someone else as deeply as they've met themselves, Like I think relationships are really confronting. They trigger us all the time, right? And so I think, like you said, the goalpost is always moving, but we're always moving too because we're changing. We're changing. We're either learning more about ourselves or we're going deeper and deeper into struggle or denial or whatever that is. And so it is, I think, one of the hardest things to be human, but then it's probably, in my mind, the second hardest thing to be human in relation to another person. I can't think of
Hmm.
anything harder.
And is the joy of seeing people have transformations in this work what keeps you going, or is there something else there that also
Mm.
motivates you?
I mean, it's so beautiful to watch two people really learn more about each other and be able to go, oh my God, I had no idea that when you said that, what you actually were afraid of was this. Like, there's nothing better to me. There's nothing more delicious than
Hmm.
watching two people meet each other in a space that's curious and compassionate, whereas previously they were, ready to grenade up and sort of, you know, go apeshit on one another. And so I love that. And I just
Just those
love,
those aha moments that they have
yeah,
sometimes. Yeah,
it's so
sure.
beautiful and it's so lovely to bear witness to. So yeah, I think that's what keeps me going. But selfishly, I know we don't like therapists to say stuff like this, but I just really enjoy it. Like I
Mhm.
like to do it. It feeds me as well. I'm an extrovert. I'm someone who's happier when I'm in conversation with someone, and so I can't think of a better way to spend my day than just being in conversation with people around the things that I think really matter.
As someone who gives advice and wisdom and guidance, who do you turn to when you need some guidance, when you need some advice? Because you've been
Yeah.
doing it your whole life, it sounds like. You talked about how you were a kid, you were the advice giver. What do you
Yeah.
do when you need it?
Well, that is the eternal question that you have you been in my therapy sessions? No. So I mean,
Sounds
my
like the short
therapist.
answer is I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, my therapist, I am a big believer in being a consumer of therapy. So that, I have a wonderful social support network. As I mentioned, my husband, I've had the same few girlfriends since I was a little girl. I have family close. But then I also have an incredible toolbox, that I pull from and that I keep putting tools in and taking old tools out um, that don't fit me anymore. So I would say both like, community and also I have a very strong drive to take care of myself.
That's great. That's a very healthy drive to have.
Yeah,
It's always nice to hear people kind of self-realize that.
totally.
Even therapists, because
For
sometimes,
especially therapists, we can't
yeah.
be, we have to be taking care of ourselves as a professional imperative.
Yeah, I always make the comparison as like, the masseuse, if they don't take care of their hands, they're
Right.
useless.
Totally.
So you always see masseuses, I don't know if that's the plural, massaging their forearms, because that's, it's like, if you don't do that at the very minimum, then
Totally.
you're out. Well, do you have
Totally.
any big hopes or plans for the future?
I hope to keep writing more. I am an avid traveler, so I hope to start planning some retreats, wellness retreats for people.
That's
Um,
exciting.
yeah, what else? Probably more teaching, given therapy, all sorts of stuff. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, let's tell people the name of the book again is Couples Therapy Activity Book by Melissa Fulgieri. Is that right? Or
Yep,
Fulgieri? Sorry.
Fulgieri. Yeah,
Fulgieri by Melissa Fulgieri, Couples Therapy Activity Book. You can get it now on Amazon. Is there any other place they should be looking out for it, or is that the main
Barnes and
kind of
Noble, Target, all the places we find books
where
these
books are
days.
sold?
Hmm.
Gotcha. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll
Thank
also in the
you.
show notes leave your own personal website because it is a little bit difficult to spell. It's Melissa, Fulgieri.com, in case you want to look up more about Melissa. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. If you're interested in learning how to get the absolute most out of your romantic relationships, then you're in luck, because I have put together a free workshop or masterclass, if you will, about 3 secrets that people in happy relationships have discovered. You can view the workshop at mrspirituality.com/3secrets. Again, it's completely free. Just go there and watch it. It'll help you on your journey, give you some wisdom, some things to think about. The website again is mrspirituality.com/3secrets. That's mrspirituality.com/3, the word secrets. It's all yours. Enjoy.